first thing is that these children are being raised in some type of freak show. You know, it's like they are Michael Jackson's children who were paraded to the world but covered up in masks. Yeah, but then remember, he covered their identities and their faces in masks. You know, so of course they're very likely to be messed up, growing up with such messed up parents who are using them in such a mucked up manner. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say on the titles is that I think what Prince William is acutely aware of, and this has certainly been my reporting, is that look at what happened when you allowed to run rampant for so many years, chasing the cash. Harry and Meghan Markle's surrogacy scandal has entered the mainstream media domain.
What if everything you thought you knew about Prince Harry wasn't just incomplete, but carefully controlled? What if the silence, the missing details, the perfectly timed appearances weren't coincidences at all, but pieces of a puzzle nobody was supposed to solve? Because right now, something feels off. Not slightly off, completely off. And the deeper people look, the more uncomfortable the questions become. It starts quietly, a whisper, a raised eyebrow, a moment where something doesn't quite add up, and then suddenly it explodes. Claims begin surfacing not from random corners of the internet, but from someone who knows exactly where to look, and more importantly, what to say. Angela Levin didn't just step into a conversation, she stepped into a storm. And the moment she opened her mouth, everything shifted. This wasn't gossip for the sake of entertainment. This felt like someone pulling back a curtain that wasn't meant to be touched, because the focus wasn't on headlines or appearances or rehearsed narratives. It was something deeper, something buried beneath years of carefully managed public image. Archie, Lilibet, the two names that suddenly became the center of a conversation no one saw coming, yet somehow everyone was ready for. And here's where it gets intense. The reaction, not calm, not dismissive, not controlled, but tense, fast, almost urgent, like something needed to be contained before it spread too far. Because when pressure builds that quickly, it tells you something. It tells you this isn't just noise. This isn't just another headline that will fade by tomorrow. This is different, and people can feel it.
If she hasn't had the children herself, or Harry hadn't been involved, then they can't be in the royal line. You know, they have to have royal blood, those little ones, and without that, there's no chance of them becoming a member of the royal family.
This case about whether you think the birth was real, whether you think there was a surrogate, whether you think Meghan was wearing a moon bump. The fact is, Harry and Meghan lied. Buckingham Palace lied on their behalf. There was a complete cover-up over the birth of
Princess Lilibet Diana had been christened. Why would they use a title for their children that represents an institution they loathe so much?
Angela Levin didn't ease into it. She didn't soften the edges or dance around the subject. She went straight to the point that others have avoided for years. And that's what made it dangerous. Because once a question is asked out loud, you can't unhear it. You can't pretend it doesn't exist anymore. And suddenly, millions of people were asking the same thing at the same time. Why did things feel different? Not slightly different. Completely different. Royal births are not casual events. They follow a structure so precise it almost feels ritualistic. Announcements, confirmations, doctors, timelines, details, everything laid out in a way that leaves no room for doubt. Because historically, there can't be doubt. Not when lineage, titles, and the future of a monarchy are involved. That clarity has always been non-negotiable. But this time, something broke that pattern. No hospital steps moment, no immediate clarity, no detailed breakdown that people have come to expect for generations. Instead, there was distance, gaps, silence where there is usually structure. And when those gaps started getting pointed out, one by one, they stopped feeling like small differences and started feeling like missing pieces. At first, people tried to brush it off. Privacy, protection, a Martin approach. It made sense on the surface. Of course it did. But then the timelines came under the microscope. The announcements didn't line up the way people expected. The locations felt unclear. The sequence of events didn't flow the way royal watchers are used to seeing. And that's when the curiosity turned into something else. Suspicion. truth, because humans are pattern seeking by nature. And when a pattern breaks, especially one that has been consistent for decades, people notice. They don't just notice, they dig, they compare, they question, and suddenly things that once seemed insignificant start to feel important. Why was the information so limited? Why did details seem to shift depending on where you looked? Why did it feel like something was being carefully controlled rather than openly shared? And here's the uncomfortable part. The longer those questions went unanswered, the louder they became. Images surfaced, analyzed frame by frame, moments revisited, statements reread. Not because people wanted drama, but because something didn't sit right. And when something doesn't sit right long enough, it starts to grow. It becomes bigger than the original question. It becomes a conversation. And conversations are hard to stop, especially when they move online. Because the internet doesn't forget. It doesn't move on quietly. It builds momentum. Clips spread. Opinions multiply. Theories collide. And before anyone can slow it down, it's everywhere. Millions watching. Millions analyzing. Millions asking the same question in slightly different ways. What are we missing? And then comes the turning point, the moment where it stops being about curiosity and starts being about reaction. Because while Angela Levin remained steady, calm, composed, almost surgical in the way she laid things out, the response on the other side felt completely different, faster, sharper, more intense. And that contrast, that's what people locked onto. Because when one side stays calm and the other side reacts with visible pressure, it creates a tension that's impossible to ignore. It doesn't answer questions. It creates more of them. If everything is simple, why does it feel complicated? If everything is clear, why does it feel hidden? If there's nothing to address, why does the reaction feel so strong? And just like that, the focus shifts again. It's no longer just about what was said, it's about how it's being handled. And sometimes that tells a much bigger story than the original claim ever could. Behind the scenes, reports start surfacing. Calls, meetings, movements, the kind of activity that suggests something is being managed, not ignored. And when something is being managed at that level, it raises a different kind of question. Not what is happening, but why it matters so much. Because people can sense when something is being contained. They can feel when a situation is trying to be controlled before it grows too large. And ironically, that very effort often does the opposite. It makes everything bigger. And now the story isn't slowing down, it's accelerating. What started as a segment is turning into a storm. And right at the center of it is Prince Harry. Not the version people are used to seeing. Not the composed figure who has handled years of media pressure. But someone who, according to reports, seems pushed. And when someone who has faced global attention for years suddenly appears shaken, people notice. They don't just notice, they watch closely. Because something about this moment feels different. Not temporary, not surface level, but deeper. Like something has shifted behind the scenes. And the world is only just starting to see the edges of it. And the most unsettling part, we're still only at the beginning. And just when it felt like the storm had reached its peak, it twisted again. Because the questions weren't fading, they were evolving. What started as curiosity about missing details suddenly expanded into something far more sensitive, far more serious, and far more uncomfortable for everyone involved. Now, it wasn't just about timelines or announcements anymore, it was about implications. Because once people began connecting those missing pieces to something bigger, royal structure, lineage, long-standing rules, the conversation crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And that's when everything intensified. The discussion shifted from why does this feel different to what does this actually mean? And that question, that one question, changed the entire atmosphere. Because royal systems are not casual. They are built on precision, on clarity, on documented truth that leaves no room for interpretation. For centuries, every birth, every detail, every confirmation has followed a rigid structure for one simple reason: there can never be uncertainty. Not when positions, titles, and succession are involved. So when uncertainty appears, it doesn't stay small. It expands. And Angela Levin knew exactly where to point the spotlight. Not by making wild claims, not by shouting, but by calmly walking through what was publicly available and what wasn't. And somehow that quiet delivery hit harder than anything loud ever could. Because she didn't tell people what to think. She made them think. And once people start thinking for themselves, the conversation becomes unstoppable. Meanwhile, the reaction surrounding Prince Harry wasn't calming down, it was escalating. Reports described a situation that felt increasingly tense. More calls, more attempts to manage the narrative, more visible pressure building as the story refused to fade. And the more that pressure showed, the more people leaned in. Because pressure tells a story. It suggests stakes, and high stakes always attract attention. But here's where things became even more unsettling. Amid all the noise, all the analysis, all the growing global attention, there was silence. Not a small pause, not a brief absence, but a complete, noticeable, undeniable silence. Meghan, gone from the conversation. No statements, no appearances, no presence at all. And that absence didn't just go unnoticed, it became a story of its own. Because this was a couple known for moving together, speaking together, presenting a united front no matter the situation. That unity was part of their identity. But now, that unity felt fractured. And people saw it immediately. Because contrast creates attention, and this contrast was impossible to ignore. On one side, Prince Harry appeared to be in the middle of a growing storm, actively trying to manage the situation as it unfolded. On the other side, Meghan remained completely out of sight, untouched by the chaos, silent in a moment where silence felt louder than any statement. And the internet reacted exactly how you'd expect. Questions exploded. Where is she? Why isn't she speaking? Why isn't she standing beside him? Is this strategy or something else? And just like that, the narrative expanded again. Now, it wasn't just about missing details or royal traditions. It was about dynamics, about perception, about what people were seeing versus what they were used to seeing. Some believed the silence was calculated, a deliberate move to avoid adding fuel to an already raging fire. Stay quiet, let the storm pass, don't engage. On the surface, it made sense. It felt controlled, strategic, but others weren't convinced. To them, the silence felt different, not controlled, but distant. Not strategic, but revealing. Because when one person is visibly under pressure and the other disappears completely, it creates a question that's hard to ignore. Is this still a united front? Or has something shifted behind the scenes? And that question didn't need an answer to grow. It fed itself through speculation, through observation, through endless online debates where every small detail became another clue in a story that refused to stay simple. At the same time, Angela Levin continued doing exactly what she had been doing from the beginning. Calm, measured, unshaken. She didn't escalate. She didn't change her tone. She simply repeated, refined, and reinforced the same points that had already triggered a global reaction. And that consistency made her seem even more credible to those watching. Because while one side appeared increasingly reactive, the other remained completely steady. And in situations like this, perception becomes everything. People don't just listen to what's being said, they watch how it's being said. They compare, they judge. They decide who feels controlled and who doesn't. And slowly, almost subtly, public opinion began to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, quietly, like a tide turning beneath the surface. Even those who had always supported Harry started hesitating, not necessarily changing sides, but questioning, wondering, looking at the situation from a different angle than before. And once that kind of doubt enters the conversation, it's almost impossible to remove. Because whatever the answer is, one thing is clear: this story isn't over.